I gritted my teeth through the pain and kept calling my son over and over again. 97 outgoing calls. The number glowed on my phone screen like knives stabbing straight into my eyes. They stacked up like interest on a debt owed by a man who could not spare even a single vacation day while his own father was dying. Tonight, at the corner of Poplar and East Parkway, a runaway truck crushed my Mercedes into twisted metal. The sound of steel shattering echoed through the Memphis night. It sounded exactly like my heart breaking into 100 pieces. My name is Raymond Parker, the man who spent his entire life building the Parker Logistics empire. I once believed I could control every negotiation in business. I could calculate every profit margin and every contract clause with perfect precision. But I failed miserably at the biggest contract of my life. The contract of being a father. Blood trickled down from my forehead, staining the corner of my phone screen red. 97 outgoing calls. Not once did my only son answer. He is my blood, the sole legal heir to Parker Logistics. But where was he now? While firefighters used power saws to cut open my car and pull me free. While my heartbeat faded weakly inside the ambulance, my son stayed silent. A terrifying silence. The silence of indifference and calculation. I lay strapped to the stretcher, staring at the flashing red ambulance lights above me. My breathing grew heavier. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation tearing through my soul. In that moment I realized I was nothing more than a money-printing machine in his eyes. Just a rich old man obsessed with control. The ambulance sped through the darkness. Sirens ripped through the night air. I closed my eyes and tasted blood and tears together on my lips. My life replayed before me like a slow-moving film. I traded my youth for wealth. I believed money could buy everything, even loyalty from a child. But I was wrong. That contract had completely collapsed. And this accident became the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I would reclaim justice for my own life. Prepare yourself, because the week that ended 30 years of my failure officially began at this very moment. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a drink, maybe a few snacks, sit back and remember this: the people in these stories always had the chance to do the right thing. They simply chose wrong. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave comment number 1 so we can begin this story together. I have a feeling you are going to love this one. Room 217 reeked of disinfectant. The heart monitor beeped in a cold, lifeless rhythm. I lay there with a breathing tube pressed against my face and my right arm locked in a brace. Outside the window, the Memphis rain began pouring harder against the glass. The clock crept past midnight. Finally, the call connected. Gary's voice came through the speaker, mixed with pounding music and crashing ocean waves. He was in the Maldives. A paradise half a world away from his father's hospital bed. I whispered that I had just survived a near-fatal accident. Do you know what my son said to me? He did not ask how many bones I had broken. He did not ask if I was in pain. The very first thing Gary did was complain. Then he started calculating. He said the trip had already cost him $6,000 in deposits. The Maldives resort had a strict cancellation policy. If he flew home now, all that money would be gone. He told me I should rest and let the nurses take care of me. According to him, this Maldives vacation mattered more because he had planned it for an entire year. Every word Gary spoke felt like freezing water poured directly into my chest. $6,000. That was the exact amount I transferred into his account every single month for the last 10 years without ever missing a day. I funded his luxurious life. I bought his first luxury car. I paid for his upscale apartment. I used money to purchase fake affection, and now the very $6,000 I handed him had become the excuse for abandoning me alone in this hospital room. He was more afraid of losing a hotel deposit than losing his father. To Gary, my life could wait, but a cancellation policy could not. The rage and heartbreak rose into my throat until I could barely breathe. I stared at the pale white ceiling above me. The truth finally stood naked and undeniable before my eyes. The son I loved more than my own life saw me as nothing more than an ATM machine. He calculated every dollar, every hour of flight time while I had given him my entire existence. The sacrifices of a father had become a joke inside one of his business negotiations. I quietly ended the call. I did not scream. I did not explode with anger. I only felt emptiness. Absolute emptiness. The last illusion inside me shattered into dust. In that moment I realized I had to stop being a foolish father. If you have ever been abandoned by the people closest to you during your darkest moment, leave comment number 2, or leave number 3 if you have never experienced that pain. I lay motionless in the darkness, my left hand clenched into a fist. Gary was going to pay for this cold-blooded calculation. But just as I believed I had been completely abandoned, the door to room 217 suddenly burst open. A tall figure stepped inside in the middle of the night. The arrival of this person would completely change the future of Parker Logistics and my life forever. At exactly 3:27 in the afternoon, the door to room 217 opened once again. Not Gary. The man who walked in was Turner, my nephew, the son of Maggie, my late younger sister. Turner stood there wearing a dark blue mechanic's uniform stained with grease and engine oil. His face looked exhausted. Red veins burned through his tired eyes from an entire night without sleep. The moment he heard about my accident, he drove 4 straight hours without stopping. An old hard hat was tucked tightly under his arm. He looked at me, at the breathing tube, at the bruises covering my body. He did not burst into tears. He did not offer empty, comforting words. He simply walked to my bedside, looked me directly in the eyes, and asked 4 simple words. "What do you need?" 4 short words. Yet, they carried more weight than 97 meaningless phone calls. I stared at Turner's hands. Rough fingers hardened by years of labor. Black engine grease still trapped beneath his fingernails. He was nothing more than an ordinary mechanic. He knew nothing about million-dollar contracts. Nothing about profit margins or corporate negotiations inside Parker Logistics. But at this moment he was here, and the contrast cut through me like a blade. On one side was Gary, my biological son, receiving $6,000 every month while worrying about a Maldives hotel cancellation fee. On the other side was Turner, a nephew who did not even carry my direct bloodline, a man I had never given a single dollar to, now standing guard over my life. Gary chose calculated silence. Turner chose silent action. Turner gently pulled the blanket higher over my chest. He refilled the warm water container. He sat quietly beside my hospital bed in the folding chair. Then he took out a damp towel and carefully wiped the dried blood from the back of my left hand. Every movement was clumsy but filled with care. I lay there silently, my chest tightening. In my business world, everything came with conditions. I always believed loyalty had to be purchased with money. But Turner was destroying every rule I had ever lived by. He cared for me without asking for a single thing in return. The warmth of his rough hands brought tears to the eyes of a stubborn old man like me. In Turner's eyes I could see Maggie again, the same pure kindness untouched by greed. I gave him a small nod, and inside my mind the first seed of change finally began to grow. A much larger plan was beginning to take shape. Gary believed he was my only choice. He believed the entire Parker Logistics fortune already belonged to him. But he was wrong. I was going to show him the true price of betrayal. However, before I could carry out this reversal, I would have to confront a brutal truth from my past, a secret I had buried for 30 years. A secret directly connected to the money I used to spoil Gary his entire life. I stared at the ceiling of the hospital room as my mind drifted backward through time. 31 years ago, when Maggie gave birth to Turner, I was busy signing a massive transportation contract. I never showed up at the hospital. Instead, I mailed my sister a check for $5,000. I believed money could replace presence. That was the greatest mistake of my life. And then I made an even bigger mistake. I carried that same business mindset into raising Gary. I turned fatherhood into a series of transactions. Every time Gary earned good grades, I rewarded him with cash. Every time he behaved well, I bought him expensive gifts. I created a greedy monster with my own hands. For 30 years, I used money to purchase his affection. I looked over at Turner, sleeping in the chair beside my hospital bed. His head leaned forward from exhaustion. The shoulder of his work uniform was torn and faded from years of use. This young man had grown up with almost nothing, yet somehow kept his pride intact. Maggie had taught him to live independently without depending on the charity of his wealthy uncle. The contrast humiliated me. I finally understood the cruel difference between the two sons in my life. One shared my blood but waited like a vulture for my death and inheritance. The other shared none of my direct bloodline yet gave me everything else that mattered. Kindness, loyalty, silent sacrifice without asking for a single dollar in return. I had invested in the wrong place. The financial report of my life was drowning in losses. Regret tore through me in the darkness. Gary had grown so accustomed to my money that he viewed $6,000 a month as an obligation, not love. My endless indulgence had stripped away his humanity. I turned him into a cold-blooded man capable of weighing his father's life against a Maldives hotel reservation. I failed as a father, but I was still a businessman, and a businessman knows exactly when it is time to cut his losses. I would not allow this failure to continue for one more day. I shifted slightly in bed and pain exploded through my ribs into my skull. My eyes moved toward the phone resting on the table beside me. I knew I had to act immediately. At this very moment, Gary was still enjoying the sunlight in the Maldives using my money. He had no idea that his comfortable life of arrogance and dependency was about to end forever. The promise I made to myself was now official. The week that would erase 30 years of failure had begun. I slowly reached for the phone, preparing to make the most important call of my life. But before I could dial the number, heavy footsteps thundered through the hallway outside room 217. The door burst open once again. A woman stepped inside, holding a thick stack of documents in her hands. Documents powerful enough to decide the future of Parker Logistics forever. The person who entered was Denise, the head nurse on the night shift. Her face was stern and emotionless. She was not carrying ordinary medical paperwork. In her hands was a thick stack of billing reports from the hospital finance department. Denise walked over, checked my IV line, then placed the documents on the table beside my bed. She looked directly into my eyes, her voice calm but sharp. Denise had handled every complicated procedure from contacting the insurance company to arranging the best available surgeon, all within just 45 minutes. The decisiveness and efficiency of a complete stranger shook me awake. A woman who barely knew me needed only 45 minutes to protect my life. Meanwhile, Gary, the son I had supported for 10 years with endless monthly payments, could not even do something that simple. The contrast drove into me like a fatal knife, destroying the final illusion I still clung to. I looked at Denise. Then I looked at Turner asleep beside my bed, completely exhausted in the folding chair. In that moment, I understood I no longer had time to hesitate. I could not keep playing the role of a father being manipulated and drained dry. My silent revenge had to begin now. With my left hand, the only one still capable of moving properly, I slowly picked up the phone. My fingers trembled as I called Ben, the chief accountant, who had stood beside me at Parker Logistics for over 2 decades. Ben answered after the third ring. His voice sounded sleepy at first, but the moment he heard mine, he became alert. I wasted no time. I ordered him to freeze every supplemental credit card under Gary's name immediately. Cancel the entire $6,000 monthly transfer without exception. No delays. No excuses. Ben fell silent for a brief second, clearly surprised by the sudden ruthlessness in my voice. But he quickly accepted the order and began taking notes. The ridiculous contract of transactional affection between father and son officially ended tonight. I hung up the phone and breathed heavily, my chest rising and falling with pain. Yet beneath the agony, a strange satisfaction spread deep into my bones. It dulled part of the suffering left behind by the crash. Very soon, Gary would realize that sunshine in the Maldives was no longer free. For the first time in his life, he would experience what it felt like to lose the source that had always fed his arrogance. But cutting off the money was only the first small move in my plan. This was not family drama anymore. It was a business war, and I needed a much heavier legal weapon if I wanted to strip away everything Gary believed already belonged to him. Tomorrow morning I would meet with attorney Arthur Simmons. But just as I closed my eyes, hoping for a moment of rest, my phone suddenly began vibrating violently against the bedside table. An anonymous text message flashed across the screen from an unknown number, and the words inside nearly stopped my heart. The anonymous text message contained only one sentence. Gary is contacting the board of directors to prove you are mentally unfit after the accident. That bastard. He was trying to steal my company before I had even left my hospital bed. The rage burned away every trace of physical pain inside my body. The very next morning I demanded an early discharge from the hospital. I could not sit there waiting to die while my own son circled my empire like a vulture. Turner quietly helped me into my coat and supported me as we walked to the car. Then we headed straight toward Peabody Place, where attorney Arthur Simmons kept his office. The moment I stepped inside Arthur's office, a familiar scent filled my lungs. The smell of old paper and serious money. The scent of legal power. The kind of place where human destinies could be destroyed or protected with nothing more than a signature. Arthur looked genuinely shocked when he saw me. My clothes were wrinkled. My face was bruised. My right arm remained locked in a heavy brace. Without hesitation, he invited me inside and ordered his secretary to close the office door tightly behind us. I lowered myself into the expensive leather chair across from the man who had handled my legal affairs for more than 20 years. Then I looked him directly in the eyes. I want to review my will, the 17-year-old will, the document where I foolishly left 100% of Parker Logistics and every piece of real estate to Gary. Arthur silently nodded. He stood up, crossed the room, and opened the wall, safe hidden behind a framed painting. Moments later, he returned carrying a thick file. The old will rested heavily on the desk between us. Every clause inside that document had once represented my pride in having a complete family, but now it looked more like a death sentence for everything I had spent my life building. I turned each page slowly with my trembling left hand. Gary believed this will was untouchable, a permanent shield protecting him no matter how disgustingly he treated me. He believed the Parker blood inside his veins automatically entitled him to everything. What Gary never understood was this: the law exists to enforce justice, and I still controlled the game. I lifted my eyes toward Arthur. My expression had become colder and more determined than ever before. I want the old will revoked completely, I said. We draft a new one immediately. Arthur quietly placed a fountain pen on the desk in front of me, but the instant the pen touched the polished wood, a loud crash exploded from the office entrance outside. At the same time, the secretary's panicked voice rang through the waiting room. The loud noise outside the office turned out to be nothing more than the secretary dropping a stack of files as she rushed into the room. Breathless and pale, she informed us that Gary had just called the office asking whether I had shown up there. He was starting to sense something was wrong. I motioned for her to leave and locked the door behind her. Time was running out. I turned toward Arthur and ordered him to begin drafting the new will immediately. Justice needed to be carried out right here in this office, filled with the smell of old paper and buried secrets. I took a deep breath to suppress the pain crushing my ribs. Then I slowly dictated every word while Arthur wrote them down. The fortune worth tens of millions of dollars tied to Parker Logistics would now be redistributed completely. I decided to transfer 70% of the company shares to Turner. The quiet mechanic nephew would become the most powerful man inside the transportation empire I spent my entire life building. And Gary, he would receive only the lake house on the outskirts of Memphis, along with a handwritten letter from me. That was not a reward. It was a prison built for his greed. That house would forever remind him of the place where he abandoned his own father. Arthur watched me with a deeply serious expression. He printed the new will and slowly pushed the document across the desk toward me. This was the moment that would change everything. I had to sign my name to make the reversal legally binding, but my right arm remained trapped inside the brace from the accident. I could not hold a pen with my dominant hand, so I reached forward with my trembling left hand and picked up the black fountain pen. That weak hand had never signed billion-dollar contracts, never controlled the fate of an empire. I lowered the pen onto the paper. Every letter I wrote looked crooked and shaky. I had to tighten every muscle in my body just to guide the pen across the page. Pain exploded through my shoulder with every movement. Each signature demanded a real sacrifice. It cost me sweat, pain, and the final destruction of the bond between a father and his only son. At last I finished signing. The new will officially took effect. If you have made it this far into the story, then it probably stirred something inside you. Please take one quick second to help support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Leave comment number 5, so I know you stayed with me until this moment. A lot of people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. I set the pen down on the desk. A strange mixture of relief and coldness spread through my mind. Gary believed he could control my life from a beach in the Maldives. He thought an old man trapped in a hospital bed would be powerless, while his company was stolen away piece by piece. This new will was Raymond Parker's answer, and it was ruthless. Right at that moment, my phone suddenly began vibrating violently across the desk. Gary's name flashed across the screen. The canceled $6,000 transfer and frozen credit cards had finally reached him. He knew something had changed. I pressed the answer button, fully prepared for the fury waiting on the other side of the line. But Gary's voice no longer carried its usual arrogance. Instead, it trembled with panic. And beneath that panic, he accidentally revealed something horrifying. His voice exploded through the speaker, rushed and desperate. He demanded to know why every credit card under his name had been declined at the hotel. He said the Maldives staff were staring at him like he was some kind of criminal or con artist. The shift in his tone happened almost instantly. First came fake concern about my injuries. Empty questions delivered without emotion. Then the moment money entered the conversation, the mask fell off completely. The anger returned. Gary demanded to know whether the accounting system at Parker Logistics had malfunctioned. He could not believe the father who spoiled him for 30 years had finally cut off the financial lifeline feeding his luxury lifestyle. I listened to his outrage in complete silence. And for the first time in years, satisfaction began rising inside me. The predator had finally stepped into the trap. Gary's voice grew louder. He shouted that I had no right to do this to my only son. He insisted he was the rightful heir to the entire empire. Then he desperately tried justifying his behavior. According to him, staying in the Maldives had been necessary to preserve the Parker family reputation in front of Lucy's wealthy business associates. Every excuse sounded like empty corporate jargon designed to hide his betrayal. I let him rant for nearly 2 full minutes. Then I took a slow breath and finally spoke. My voice came out calm, steady, and sharp enough to cut steel. I am not speaking with you, I said slowly. I am listening to you explain yourself. There is a very big difference between those two things. The line went silent immediately. A terrifying silence. In that instant, Gary realized something had changed. He was no longer speaking to a weak old father begging for affection. He was hearing the voice of the chairman of Parker Logistics, the same man who had crushed competitors and traders in business for decades without hesitation. I continued speaking. Every transaction between us officially ends today. Gary instantly changed tactics again. This time, the fear turned into threats. He said he was booking the next available flight back to Memphis immediately. Then he warned me that if I refused to restore his accounts, he would release confidential medical records to the board of directors and force me out of power permanently. He truly believed he held the final weapon capable of destroying me. I smiled quietly to myself, a bitter smile filled with contempt. Gary had no idea that the new will had already been signed with my shaking left hand only minutes earlier. Every card he thought he held had already turned into worthless paper. Without another word, I ended the call. I looked across the room at Turner, standing guard near the office door with calm determination in his eyes. The direct confrontation was coming soon. Gary would return to Memphis filled with rage and entitlement. But the moment he stepped into my hospital room, another devastating surprise from attorney Arthur Simmons would already be waiting for him. A final blow powerful enough to turn every one of Gary's plans into ashes before he even had the chance to speak. Heavy footsteps thundered through the hospital hallway, shattering the silence outside room 217. The door burst open so violently it slammed against the wall with a deafening crash. Gary stood there. His expensive designer clothes were wrinkled from the emergency flight back from the Maldives. His face burned red with rage and exhaustion. But inside his eyes there was not even the smallest trace of concern for the father who had nearly died in a wreck only days earlier. He stared directly at me. Then at Turner, standing beside my hospital bed. Gary stormed forward and threw his travel bag onto the floor. Immediately, he began shouting. He demanded to know why I humiliated him in front of his wife's family. He demanded to know why attorney Arthur Simmons refused to give him access to Parker Logistics records. I remained motionless in the hospital bed, staring calmly at my own son. The anger pouring out of him no longer hurt me. It only looked like the desperate panic of a man about to lose everything. Gary moved closer and reached toward my phone, intending to force me to call Ben and restore his accounts. But Turner stepped forward, instantly blocking him with the broad shoulders of a mechanic who spent his entire life working with his hands. Gary laughed coldly. His eyes swept over Turner's grease-stained work uniform with open disgust. He ordered Turner to move aside and stop interfering in Parker family business. Then he arrogantly threatened to throw him out of Memphis the moment he took control of the company. I took a slow breath and raised my left hand, signaling Turner to step back. Then I looked directly into Gary's eyes. When I spoke, my voice echoed through the hospital room like steel striking concrete. I am finished paying for your attention. The sentence hit Gary like ice water poured over fire. His expression changed instantly. I continued slowly, every word sharp enough to cut flesh. For 30 years, I made the mistake of believing money could raise a loyal son. I used $6,000 every month to purchase fake concern. I paid for your arrogance. But that contract ended forever at the corner of Poplar and East Parkway the moment you chose a Maldives hotel deposit over your father's life. Panic finally appeared in Gary's face. The rage disappeared and transformed into pure fear. For the first time, he understood this was permanent. He immediately began scrambling for excuses. He insisted he had only been joking. He claimed he rushed back because he cared deeply about me. Then suddenly he dropped to his knees beside the hospital bed and tried grabbing my left hand. I pulled it away. At that exact moment, Arthur Simmons entered the room carrying a new file folder beneath his arm. He walked calmly toward the bed and opened the documents in front of Gary. Then Arthur read my decision out loud. When Gary heard the clause granting 70% of Parker Logistics to Turner while leaving him only the lake house and a handwritten letter, his entire body collapsed inward. All the color drained from his face. In that moment, Gary realized he had lost every ounce of power connected to the Parker empire. My revenge had reached its most satisfying point. The cold-blooded man who calculated everything in life had finally paid the ultimate price with the very thing he desired most. Gary looked at me with desperate eyes as tears of late regret finally rolled down his face. But it was too late. Justice had already been carried out completely. However, just as Gary tried standing up to scream one final time, Arthur Simmons slowly removed a red envelope from his briefcase. It was the handwritten letter I had painfully written using my trembling left hand back at the law office. Inside that envelope was one final hidden condition, a devastating truth about the origin of the $6,000 Gary had received every month his entire life. And once he learned the truth, he would spend the rest of his life haunted by it. Gary's hands trembled as he opened the red envelope. Inside were the crooked handwritten lines I had painfully written with my left hand. The $6,000 you received every month for the last 10 years did not come from Parker Logistics profits. That money came from Maggie's life insurance policy. The aunt you always looked down on left that money behind with one condition only. I had to use it to help raise you into a decent man. The moment Gary finished reading those words, he went completely silent. The weight of the truth crushed him from the inside out. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the floor of room 217. This time, nobody helped him back up. 1 week later, I was discharged from the hospital. I never returned to the suffocating office towers at Peabody Place. Instead, I stood quietly on the balcony of my small home, watching the warm golden light spread across Memphis. The Tennessee sunset looked peaceful in a way I had not noticed in decades. Down in the yard, Turner stood beside a group of engineers inspecting the newest Parker Logistics truck fleet. He accepted control of the company not because of greed, but because he wanted to protect the life's work Maggie and I built together. As I watched his steady figure moving beneath the evening sunlight, I finally felt something I had not experienced in years. Peace. The financial report of my life had finally balanced itself. Join the Dad's real-life revenge community by liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more raw, emotional, and family-driven stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space with us. Life is like a long highway. We spend so much time chasing money, status, and power that we forget to build the things that truly matter. Never turn family love into a business negotiation. Never let lifeless numbers blind you to genuine human connection. What you truly deserve will eventually find its way back to you. I finally accepted my mistakes and corrected them while I still had time. Do not wait until it is too late, like Gary, forced to spend the rest of his life trapped inside regret and loneliness. Treasure the people beside you while they are still here.